My daughter wasted all our savings on her criminal boyfriend. But my 15-year-old grandson turned the tables and made them cry. Stay with me while I share how it all happened. If this story touches your heart, I'd be grateful if you could support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Samuel, and I'm in my early 60s. I've worked hard all my life, first in a factory and later running a small mechanic shop of my own. I never lived fancy, but I always believed in saving, in being prepared, and in building something steady. For decades, I put away money bit by bit, telling myself it was for retirement, for peace of mind, maybe even for the dream my late wife and I used to talk about, buying an RV and traveling the country together. That dream kept me going, even after she passed and I had to face life alone. My daughter, Kaylee, was my only child. I loved her deeply, though she always walked a different path than I hoped. Where I was steady, she was restless. Where I saved, she spent. She had a way of chasing excitement, of running after people who didn't deserve her, and of making choices that left me worried. But no matter what, I never stopped being there for her. That's what a father does. You stand behind your child, even when their steps are shaky. Then came Jack, my grandson. From the moment he was born, he changed everything. Kaylee was young and struggling, and many times she left Jack in my care. I didn't mind. In fact, I was grateful. That boy gave me a reason to smile again after losing my wife. He was sharp, thoughtful, and more mature than most adults I knew. He would sit with me in the shop, learning how engines worked, or walk with me in the evenings, asking questions about life. Sometimes I felt he understood me more than his own mother did. For years, I told myself that family was unbreakable. That no matter what mistakes Kaylee made, she would always come back to me, and our bond would keep us whole. I believed loyalty, especially between parent and child, was something nothing could destroy. But life proved me wrong. The hardest truth I ever learned is that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people you'd give everything for. Sometimes it comes from your own home. I thought my savings were safe, that the years of hard work and sacrifice would guarantee me a quiet, secure future. I thought Kaylee might stumble, but never cross a line that could shatter my trust in her. And yet she did. I didn't see the signs at first, though maybe I should have. Kaylee had always leaned on me, always asked for help when she got into trouble. I told myself I was doing right by always giving, always protecting, always forgiving. But love without boundaries can be dangerous. It was Jack who sensed it before I did. That boy noticed everything. He would tug at my sleeve and whisper, "Grandpa, I don't think Mom's making good choices." His words worried me, but I brushed them off, thinking he was just too young to understand. I see now he understood more than I did. Because the day came when I realized my daughter, the little girl I carried on my shoulders and stayed up waiting for, had made a choice that broke me to my core. She betrayed me. She took what wasn't hers. She took the savings I had spent a lifetime building, the security my wife and I once dreamed about, and handed it to a man who only saw me as a fool. That moment changed everything. And if it weren't for Jack, I might not have found the strength to face it. This is how it began. The story of a father who lost everything to betrayal, and a grandson who refused to let that betrayal win. I spent most of my life working long hours, the kind that left my hands sore and my back aching when I finally crawled into bed. For many years, I worked in a factory, doing the same shifts day in and day out, watching the machines hum while I thought about how I could give my family more. The pay wasn't great, but I held on to the belief that if I stayed steady and put a little away each month, eventually it would build into something worth having. Later on, when I finally had enough courage and experience, I opened a small mechanic shop. It wasn't anything grand, but it was mine. I fixed cars, changed oil, and helped neighbors keep their trucks running. That shop became both my pride and my livelihood. The reason I worked so hard was simple. I wanted to give my wife the life she deserved. She was a gentle, patient woman who stood by me through everything. She used to tell me that one day, when we had enough saved, we should buy a small RV. She wanted to see the country, not in a rushed way, but slowly, driving along quiet highways, stopping at little diners, visiting parks, and watching sunsets in places we'd never been before. It was her dream, and it became mine too. I could see it so clearly, her sitting by the window of that RV smiling, holding a cup of coffee as the world rolled by. But life had other plans. She passed away far too early, leaving me with only memories and a savings account that suddenly felt heavier than ever. The money we had slowly put aside wasn't just numbers on paper. It was pieces of her dream. Even after she was gone, I kept saving. Maybe it was a way to stay connected to her, to honor what we once planned together. I wasn't alone, though. I had my daughter, Kaylee. She was my only child, and I loved her more than I can ever explain. But the truth is, she was never like her mother. Kaylee was what people politely call a free spirit. She didn't believe in staying in one place too long or in working jobs she thought were boring. She would bounce from one idea to another, convinced the next adventure would finally make her happy. She had charm, that much was true, but it often pulled her toward the wrong kind of people. Boyfriends who promised her the world and left her with nothing, jobs she quit within weeks because they didn't excite her, dreams that burned bright and then went out just as quickly. I tried to guide her, but guiding Kaylee was like trying to hold on to water. It slipped through no matter how tightly I grasped. Still, she was my daughter. I thought if I kept being steady, eventually she'd settle down, find her balance, and maybe even remember the lessons her mother and I tried to teach her. Then came Jack, my grandson. Kaylee had him young, and from the very beginning, she struggled to manage. She loved him in her own way, but responsibility never came easy to her. More often than not, she left him with me. Sometimes she said she needed a break, sometimes she said she was figuring things out, and sometimes she simply disappeared for a while. At first, I worried about what it meant for Jack, being shifted back and forth, but over time I realized something. That boy was steadier than his own mother. Raising him felt natural, almost like I'd been given a second chance at fatherhood. He'd sit on a stool in my shop, legs too short to reach the ground, watching me work on engines. He asked endless questions. How does the oil move? Why does the spark plug matter? What happens if you don't tighten this bolt just right? He was curious, not just about machines, but about life. When he got older, he started helping with small things, handing me tools or sweeping the floor. He did it without being asked, like he understood the value of pitching in. What struck me most about Jack wasn't just his intelligence, but his awareness. He noticed things people twice his age missed. He could sense moods, pick up on tension, and see through lies quicker than anyone I knew. If Kaylee came home with a new boyfriend, Jack would watch him carefully, like he was already trying to figure out if the man was worth trusting. Often, he'd quietly whisper to me later, "I don't like him." He wasn't rude or loud about it. He just saw things for what they were. In many ways, Jack was forced to grow up faster than he should have. He knew his mom wasn't reliable, and he knew I was the one who would always be there. That awareness didn't make him bitter, though. Instead, it made him stronger. He'd try to protect me sometimes, even though I was the one meant to protect him. If Kaylee raised her voice or made reckless choices, Jack would glance at me, his eyes saying he understood, that I wasn't alone. It amazed me, how a boy could carry himself with such maturity while still only a child. Over the years, Jack became the reason I kept going. My savings, once tied to the dream of traveling with my wife, now became something else, a safety net for Jack's future. I wanted him to have the chance his mother never reached for, the chance to study, to work, to live without constantly worrying if there'd be food on the table or a roof overhead. Every dollar I tucked away felt like a promise to him, that no matter what happened, he would be okay. I didn't know then how fragile that promise really was. At the time, all I knew was that I had worked hard, saved faithfully, and built a life where my grandson could thrive, even if my daughter still wandered aimlessly. I thought the money was safe. I thought family loyalty was stronger than temptation. But the truth was, while I held on to Jack with all my heart, Kaylee's choices were slowly pulling us toward a storm I never saw coming. It started quietly at first, just small mentions from Kaylee about a new guy she was seeing. "His name's Derek," she said one evening while flipping through her phone. "He's got some business ideas, Dad. Big things. I think he could really help me." I smiled politely, trying to sound supportive, but inside, something didn't sit right. There was a confidence in her voice, a sparkle in her eyes that reminded me of how she always got caught up in people who promised more than they could deliver. I didn't want to say it aloud, but I had a feeling Derek wasn't the kind of man we could trust. A few weeks later, Derek came over to meet me. He was in his early 30s, handsome, polished, and smooth in the way some people can be when they're hiding something. He shook my hand firmly, smiling like he was genuinely friendly, but I could sense the underlying arrogance, the way he talked as if he already owned the world. He carried himself with charm, and at first glance, I can see why Kaylee was drawn to him. He had a way of making everything seem exciting, urgent, and full of promise. "You're a lucky guy," Derek said to Kaylee with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "She's smart, driven. I can see why you're proud of her. I nodded, keeping my face calm. Nice to meet you, Derek. Just glad Kaylee's happy. But as the conversation went on, Derek couldn't help but brag. He talked about his business ideas, investment schemes, and ways to make easy money. I listened politely, but my stomach sank. Something about the way he explained things felt rehearsed, like he'd said the same lines to dozens of others before me. He used words like opportunity and potential, but when I asked questions about specifics, he gave vague answers, twisting the conversation back to grand promises rather than concrete plans. I could feel a warning buzzing in the back of my mind, one I couldn't ignore. That evening, Jack pulled me aside quietly. His 15-year-old eyes were serious, scanning Derek as he stood by the kitchen counter talking. "Grandpa," he said in a low voice, "Mom's gonna get hurt by this guy. I don't know why she can't see it, but he's bad news." I looked at him, a mix of pride and worry swelling in my chest. Jack had always had this instinct, this ability to read people like they were open books. If he was uneasy about Derek, that alone made me pay closer attention. I put a hand on his shoulder. "I'll keep an eye out, Jack. You're right to notice. Just don't worry too much. Your mom might see things differently, but I won't let anyone hurt us." Still, I couldn't ignore what was coming. A few days later, I tried to talk to Kaylee about Derek, choosing my words carefully. I didn't want to push her away. I just wanted her to understand my concern. "Kaylee," I started gently one evening. "I know you care about him, but I'm worried. Something about Derek doesn't feel right to me. I just want you to be careful." Her reaction was immediate and sharp. She slammed the cabinet door behind her, her eyes flashing with anger. "Dad, you're always judging me. You never trust me. Derek believes in me, unlike you." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I didn't want this conversation to turn into an argument, but it felt like the first real rift forming between us. "Kaylee," I said softly, "it's not about judging. I just don't want to see you get hurt. I've been around long enough to recognize warning signs when I see them." "Enough, Dad," she shouted, her voice breaking with frustration. "I can make my own decisions. I don't need you telling me who I should date or what I should do. Derek's different. He cares about me." Jack was watching from the hallway, silent but attentive, and I could see the tension reflected in his expression. He wanted to step in, I could tell, but he stayed quiet, letting me handle it. I could see in his eyes that he already understood what I was beginning to feel, that this wasn't just another boyfriend coming and going. This was someone who might take more than we were willing to give. It hurt more than I expected. Kaylee wasn't just defending Derek. She was pushing me away, closing the door on the advice and concern I had given her all her life. It was the first time I truly realized that being a parent didn't always mean being heard. Sometimes it meant watching someone you love make choices you knew were wrong, and feeling powerless to stop them. After that night, things changed. There was tension in the air whenever Derek came around. Kaylee's voice was sharper, her patience thinner. And while I continued to try and reason with her, I knew the first real rift between us had formed. It was subtle, like a crack in glass, but I could see it growing. Jack and I started paying closer attention. We watched Derek's actions, his words, and the way he manipulated conversations. We didn't say much at first. Sometimes the smartest move is to observe quietly, but the unease grew heavier with each passing day. That was the moment I realized this wouldn't be a simple warning. Derek wasn't just a bad influence, he could become a threat. And Kaylee, blinded by charm and hope, didn't see it yet. I knew we had to be careful because the path ahead could hurt us all, but especially the people I loved the most, my daughter and my grandson. It was the start of a storm I couldn't avoid, and I knew Jack and I would have to face it together. I'll never forget the morning I discovered it. It was supposed to be a quiet day, one of those rare mornings where I could sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and just breathe. I logged into my bank account, ready to check the balance and see the slow but steady growth of years of saving. That's when my heart dropped, my stomach tightened, and my hands started to shake. Thousands of dollars were gone. Not a small amount that could be brushed off. Tens of thousands, vanished as if they'd never existed. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a glitch, or some bank error. I called and double-checked, but the numbers didn't lie. My savings, the account that represented decades of hard work, careful budgeting, and sacrifice, had been almost completely drained. Panic surged through me, quickly followed by a wave of anger and disbelief. How could this happen? Who would do such a thing? And then the dreadful realization hit me. It had to be someone I trusted. I went through the statements, every transaction, every transfer, and my heart sank as I traced it back. Kaylee's name appeared multiple times. My own daughter. My little girl, the one I had raised, the one I had sacrificed everything for. She had taken my money. And she wasn't alone. Derek's name appeared alongside hers, confirming what I had feared. They had worked together, planning and executing this betrayal as if it were nothing more than a casual scheme. I tried to stay calm at first, but the anger and hurt were unbearable. I paced the living room, muttering to myself, trying to make sense of it. Why? I whispered. Why would she do this? The betrayal wasn't just financial. It cut deep into my soul. I had raised her to value honesty, to respect family, to understand the importance of trust. And in one careless, reckless act, she had thrown all of that away. When Kaylee came into the room later, I confronted her. My voice shook, a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Kaylee, I said, what have you done? All of these years, all my savings, where is it? Her reaction stunned me. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look remorseful. Instead, her eyes blazed with defiance. Dad, she snapped, it's not what you think. It's an investment. Derek said it would double our money. We're going to make so much, you'll see. I felt my chest tighten. I couldn't believe the words coming from her mouth. An investment? I repeated, incredulous. Kaylee, that was my retirement. That was my life's work. You took it without asking, without even telling me, and now you expect me to just trust that it'll be okay. Her anger grew as mine did. You don't understand, Dad. Derek believes in me. He's helping me do something big. You're always so negative. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her and make her understand what she had done. Instead, I felt a hollow, humiliating pain. I had been betrayed not by strangers, not by circumstances, but by my own daughter. My trust had been ripped apart, and she didn't even seem to care. She was defending a man I had warned her about from the beginning, the very man I feared would hurt her. Jack had been in the next room, quiet at first, observing. I could hear the faint creak of the stairs and then his footsteps as he moved closer, his eyes wide, heartbroken, and confused. He overheard the entire confrontation. He saw his mother raise her voice, defend Derek, and dismiss the man who had loved and protected her all her life. I could see the hurt in Jack's face, the same kind of shock and disbelief I felt myself. He was witnessing not just financial ruin, but the collapse of the trust we had built together. I tried to steady my voice, speaking more quietly now, almost pleading. Kaylee, this isn't just about money. This is about trust. About family. About everything we believed in. How could you let Derek manipulate you like this? Her response made me feel even smaller. She turned her eyes away from me, finally letting out a frustrated scream. You don't get it, Dad. You've always tried to control me. Derek knows how to help me, how to make things right. You just don't understand. The humiliation cut deep. I felt exposed, powerless, and completely alone in that moment. Not only had my daughter betrayed me, but she had chosen someone else over me, someone who had no right to meddle in our lives. She wasn't just defending herself, she was siding with Derek, and in that instant, my world felt like it was crashing around me. Jack stayed quiet, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He understood what had happened, even if he couldn't fully process it yet. His mother, his only parent, had just hurt the man who had always been there for her, the man who had provided for her, protected her, and loved her unconditionally. That day, the house was filled with tension, anger, and heartbreak. I realized that the road ahead would be hard, filled with difficult choices and painful lessons about who we can trust and what family really means. The betrayal wasn't just about the money. It was about love, loyalty, and the fragile line that separates care from destruction. And Jack, sharp-eyed and perceptive, had already started to see the truth in ways I feared Kaylee never would. I never thought I would feel so empty, so stripped of everything I had worked for. Sitting in my kitchen that morning, staring at my now nearly empty bank account, I realized a truth I had been avoiding. My retirement dreams were gone. Decades of careful saving, of working long hours, of skipping small luxuries to make sure we'd be secure in our later years. It was all gone, vanished in an instant. My late wife's dream of traveling the country, of relaxing in our old age without worry, was shattered. I had hoped to give Jack a life with stability and comfort, a childhood where he could grow without fear. Now, even that seemed uncertain. Derek didn't make it any easier. That smug man seemed to enjoy watching me unravel. The first time he came back into my shop after the theft, he grinned like he had a secret only I could never understand. "You're too old to understand how real money is made," he said casually, leaning against the counter, twirling a pen in his fingers. "You've spent your whole life doing it the hard way. There are smarter ways to grow wealth, Samuel, and clearly, you're not the type to recognize them." I wanted to shout, to tell him that my money was earned honestly, that my life had been dedicated to building something meaningful, something real. But he didn't care. He was confident, arrogant, and wrapped in a charm that blinded Kaye to the truth. I felt powerless, humiliated, and exhausted all at once. Kaylee's choice made the wound deeper. Despite everything, she chose Derek over me. I tried to reason with her, to remind her of what mattered, but she wouldn't listen. In her mind, Derek represented excitement, opportunity, and a life she thought she wanted. She packed up her things one evening and moved in with him, taking Jack along. I watched them leave, my grandson clinging to her hand for reassurance, unaware of the storm ahead. My house felt empty in a way I hadn't anticipated, the echo of absence ringing in every corner. For a while, I tried to carry on as normal. I worked in the shop, did small repairs, and forced myself to eat meals alone at the table. But my heart ached. I had lost both the money I had saved and the closeness I thought I had with my daughter. Each day felt heavier than the last, a reminder that the security and dreams I had built had been stolen in more ways than one. Then, a week later, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to see Jack standing there, a small backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes hesitant but resolute. My heart jumped in my chest. "Grandpa," he said softly, almost shyly, "Mom and Derek don't care about me. Can I stay here?" Time seemed to stop. The boy I had helped raise, the boy who had been caught between his mother's poor choices and my attempts to protect him, had chosen to come back to me. He had realized, even at 15, that the people who were supposed to care for him had let him down. The mixture of relief and heartbreak was overwhelming. I wanted to scoop him up and never let go, but I also had to remain steady for him, to show him that despite the pain and loss, there was still safety, still love, still home. "Of course, Jack," I said, my voice steady though my hands shook. "You can stay here. Always. I promise you'll have a safe place with me." Jack's face brightened slightly, a small flicker of trust and hope returning. I could see the tension in his shoulders ease a bit, the weight of betrayal and disappointment lifting as he realized he wasn't alone anymore. That moment, small as it seemed, became a turning point. Despite the chaos, despite the money lost and the dreams stolen, I had him. I could still protect him. I could still provide him with a sense of stability, even if the world outside felt uncertain. Over the next few weeks, Jack settled back into our home. He helped me with small chores, repaired simple things in the shop, and kept me company in the quiet evenings. I noticed how he watched me, learning not just about engines and tools, but about life, resilience, and trust. The bond we shared strengthened, rooted in love and the shared experience of betrayal. I knew that whatever happened next, we would face it together. I thought about Kaye often during those weeks. I couldn't understand her choices, and the anger I felt toward her didn't fade. Yet, I also knew I had to focus on what mattered most, Jack's well-being. He was the one who mattered, the one whose future I could still influence. Sitting at the kitchen table one evening, Jack looked up from a notebook he was sketching in and said, "Grandpa, I don't care about the money. I just want to be with someone who cares about me." His words hit me like a punch to the chest. In that simple sentence, he had already forgiven the past, chosen the present, and trusted me to protect him. I reached across the table, holding his hand, and nodded. "You've got that with me, Jack. Always. No matter what happens, this will always be your home." Even as the future seemed uncertain and my retirement dreams felt like a distant memory, I realized something crucial. We had lost money, yes, but we hadn't lost each other. And in that loss, there was still a glimmer of hope. Jack and I would face whatever came next together, stronger than before, bound not by money or convenience, but by love and loyalty. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt a small sense of peace. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was still worth protecting. And I knew, with Jack by my side, I could survive whatever lay ahead. Life with Jack back in the house brought a strange mix of comfort and quiet tension. The house, once heavy with emptiness after Kaye left, slowly began to feel alive again. There was laughter at the table, small jokes while washing dishes, and the familiar rhythm of someone who belonged under this roof. Jack moved with a confidence I hadn't seen before, as if he had stepped into a role he didn't ask for, but felt responsible for. He took small tasks around the house seriously, helping me fix leaky faucets, sweep the garage, and even reorganize old boxes in the attic. I watched him and felt a swell of pride mixed with a protective instinct I hadn't realized I needed so badly. At the shop, he became an unexpected helper. I hadn't wanted him to carry too much responsibility, but Jack insisted. "I can do it, Grandpa," he said one morning, wiping grease from his small hands. "You've always taught me how to do things right. I want to help." His confidence and willingness to work made the long hours a little easier. He learned quickly, absorbing lessons I didn't even know I was teaching. He passed me tools without being asked, remembered what order I liked things done in, and even handled small repairs for neighbors who stopped by. The boy was growing into a capable young man faster than I could have imagined. But I knew the hardships he had endured had forced him to see the world differently. One evening, after we had finished dinner and cleaned up the kitchen together, Jack leaned against the counter, looking more serious than usual. "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" he said softly. I nodded, sensing there was something important he wanted to say. "I hate how Mom treats you," he began, his voice steady but laced with pain. "I can't understand why she sided with Derek, why she let him take your money and then just act like nothing happened. And I hate that she made me go with them, like I had no choice." His eyes, bright and clear, met mine. "It's not fair to you. You've done everything for us. You didn't deserve this." I swallowed hard, feeling the lump in my throat. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't his fault, that he hadn't caused any of this. But more than anything, I wanted him to understand that what he was feeling was valid. I put a hand on his shoulder. "Jack, I'm not angry at you. You have nothing to be sorry for. I'm hurt, yes, deeply, but you didn't make any of these choices. You've always done your best, and that's all anyone could ever ask for." Jack nodded slowly, but I could see the determination in his eyes. I knew he had made a silent decision. He wasn't just upset. He was thinking of ways to protect me, to make sure nothing like this could ever happen again. That thought both worried and comforted me. He was still a boy, but the care and responsibility he felt for me were beyond his years. Over the following weeks, our bond grew deeper. We spent hours talking about life, about mistakes, about trust, and about loyalty. Jack listened carefully when I shared stories about his mother's childhood and about the lessons my wife and I had tried to teach her. He asked thoughtful questions and offered his own insights, showing a perspective shaped by hardship and by observation. He was perceptive, seeing patterns and intentions that even I sometimes missed. He also showed a quiet bravery. While I worried about how he might be influenced by Kaylee's poor choices or by Derek's presence, Jack seemed to have already drawn his own line between right and wrong. He didn't just talk about wanting to help. He demonstrated it in subtle ways. He kept track of small things, asked about unusual phone calls, noticed inconsistencies in stories, and quietly reminded me to be cautious. It was like he had stepped into the role of protector without saying it aloud, and I could see he was determined to ensure our little world remained safe. Sometimes, late at night, we would sit together in the living room after the lights were off, sharing our fears and whispers. Jack would talk about how confusing it was to see his mother choose Derek over family, and I would listen, offering what comfort I could. I told him that life sometimes lets people make terrible mistakes, but we cannot control their choices, only how we respond to them. He nodded, understanding more than most adults would, and I could see him processing everything, forming his own plan to protect what he valued. Jack's quiet determination gave me strength I didn't know I needed. Even in the midst of loss, betrayal, and shattered dreams, I realized that having him back had given me a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just a grandson. He was a companion, a helper, and in ways I had never anticipated, a protector. And as I watched him grow more confident and watchful each day, I knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, supporting each other in a world that had already shown us how fragile trust could be. By the time weeks passed, it felt like Jack and I had created our own small world, one built on honesty, loyalty, and shared effort. I could see the promise in him, not just as a smart, observant boy, but as someone who would stand by me when others chose not to. And in that, I found hope, resilience, and a bond that no betrayal could break. It didn't take long for the cracks in Derek's carefully crafted image to start showing. At first, it was subtle, small missed payments, vague excuses, whispers from neighbors who had dealings with him. Then, the more serious signs appeared. Men I didn't recognize started showing up at our old neighborhood, asking questions and leaving quickly when Derek wasn't home. They weren't friendly visitors. I could feel the tension in the air whenever Kaye mentioned him, and I could see the unease in Jack's eyes. The boy had always been perceptive, noticing things adults overlooked, and now he was watching closely, waiting for the moment when everything would unravel. Derek's business deals, which he had once boasted about as clever ways to make easy money, began to collapse spectacularly. I heard stories of unpaid debts piling up, suppliers showing up demanding cash they would never see, and shady friends who seemed to appear out of nowhere, threatening and aggressive. The man I had once despised for his arrogance now seemed careless, reckless, and completely unprepared to face the consequences of his own actions. It was almost surreal, watching the man who had charmed Kaye, who had stolen from me, unravel right in front of her eyes. And yet, Kaye refused to see the truth. She clung to Derek as if his promises were all that kept her afloat. Every warning, every piece of evidence I had hoped would open her eyes, was met with denial. "He's doing his best," she said one evening when Jack quietly mentioned seeing some of Derek's friends lurking near the shop. "You don't understand him, Dad. He's a good man. He's just working through some things." Her blindness was painful to watch. She was so caught up in her loyalty to Derek that she ignored the warning signs, the looming danger that everyone else could see. It was as if she had decided that admitting he was wrong, or that she had been manipulated, would make her life crumble, and she couldn't face that truth. I felt helpless, watching her defend him as if I were the enemy for noticing what was right in front of us. One night, after a particularly tense week of bad news and unanswered calls, Kaye rang my phone. I answered, expecting to hear her frantic voice or, perhaps, Derek's smooth assurances of some new plan. Instead, I heard something that made my chest tighten instantly. Kaye crying. Her voice was raw, shaky, and desperate. "Dad, I need help. We're running out of money. Derek promised it would work, but it hasn't. Can you send some? Just enough to get us through." For a moment, my heart wanted to give in. I wanted to hear her voice, the same little girl I had raised, and provide for her just like I always had. But I knew this wasn't the same Kaye I had once guided. This was a woman who had made choices, poor ones, that had consequences she refused to face. Her dependence on Derek had grown too deep, and if I gave her money again, I would be enabling the same cycle that had destroyed my savings and nearly destroyed our family. "I can't, Kaye," I said firmly, trying to keep my voice calm even though it trembled with emotion. "I can't give you any more. You need to take responsibility for your decisions. Derek has shown you who he is. You need to face this yourself." There was silence on the other end, punctuated only by soft sobs. I don't know what to do," she whispered finally. Then the line went dead. I sank into my chair, my hands shaking. Part of me still ached for her, still wanted to fix things, still wanted to rescue her from the consequences of her choices. But the truth was clear. She had chosen this path. She had chosen Derek over me, over Jack, and over the values we had always tried to instill. That realization hurt more than the loss of money ever could. I felt torn in ways I hadn't anticipated. Kaye was still my daughter, the same little girl I had carried on my shoulders, the same teenager I had stayed up waiting for. I loved her unconditionally. But love alone couldn't undo the consequences of her decisions, couldn't shield her from the reality that Derek was not the man she believed him to be. And as painful as it was, I had to allow her to face the fallout of her actions. Watching her struggle from a distance was agonizing. I wanted to reach out to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay. But I knew that intervening now would only prolong the harm. She had to understand, finally, the cost of blind loyalty and misplaced trust. Jack, at least, was safe with me. That thought gave me a small measure of relief amid the storm. I thought back to all the nights I had worried about Derek, all the warnings I had given Kaye, and all the times I had tried to shield her from harm. And now, finally, the damage was becoming unavoidable. Derek's schemes were collapsing, and Kaye could no longer hide behind excuses. It was a bitter reality. I was angry, frustrated, and heartbroken all at once. But amidst the chaos, one thing remained certain. I would be here for Jack, just as I had promised. Kaye may have chosen the wrong path, but my grandson didn't have to suffer the consequences of her decisions. And while I couldn't save her from herself, I could ensure that at least one part of our family remained safe, steady, and unbroken. That night, as I sat in the quiet house after hanging up the phone, I realized how fragile trust can be and how easily it can be shattered. But I also realized that loyalty, responsibility, and love are things that must be earned. And sometimes, They must be protected from even the people we care about most. Kaylee had chosen her path. Now, Derek's world was closing in, and the consequences she had avoided for so long were finally catching up. And while I grieved for what could have been, I prepared myself to stand strong for the only person left who truly needed me, Jack. Jack had always been sharp, but over the past few weeks, I began to notice a new side of him, a cunning, focused determination I hadn't seen before. He spent hours observing Derek when we could hear him talking on the phone or pacing in Kaylee's apartment during the rare visits. One afternoon, Jack quietly leaned against the counter in my kitchen, his eyes narrowing. "Grandpa," he said softly, "I think Derek's hiding a lot more than we know. I want to prove it." At first, I laughed nervously. "Prove what, Jack? You're just a kid. Don't get yourself into trouble." But he shook his head, resolute. "I'm not just a kid, Grandpa. I've seen what he's done. You lost your savings, and Mom, she's blind to it. I'm not going to let him get away with it." And so, he began his investigation. It was subtle at first. He started by taking note of Derek's strange behaviors, keeping quiet whenever I asked questions. He would sneak into the apartment when Kaylee was out or distracted, jotting down small details. Receipts from unknown businesses, letters with cryptic notes, packages that looked suspicious. He watched Derek carefully, noting the way he exaggerated deals, twisted words, and manipulated situations. One evening, Jack overheard Derek on the phone, speaking in that smooth, arrogant tone he always used. Derek was bragging about stolen goods, talking about ways he had tricked suppliers and hidden money from authorities. Jack froze, listening closely, and whispered to me later, "Grandpa, he's laundering money, and he's not stopping. I need to catch him saying it." Jack became meticulous. He borrowed an old phone I had in a drawer, one of those basic models with a simple recorder function. He hid it in his backpack, in the corner of the living room during Derek's rare visits, and began recording conversations. Each word, each boast Derek made, was captured quietly, carefully, as if the boy had been preparing for this mission his whole life. He didn't stop there. Jack started collecting physical evidence, receipts, invoices, and even small contracts that Derek signed or left carelessly lying around. He knew Derek's arrogance would be his weakness, so he devised a clever trap. Jack left a mistakenly sent note where Derek could see it, worded in such a way that Derek proudly admitted some of his schemes in writing. The boy was careful, precise, patient. Every piece of evidence was a step closer to exposing the truth. One afternoon, while Jack and I were sitting in the garage, I saw the intensity in his eyes and felt a mix of awe and fear. "Jack," I said, voice low, "this is serious. If Derek finds out you're doing this, he could retaliate. He's dangerous, and you're still just a kid." Jack looked at me steadily, unafraid. "Grandpa, I know. But you've already lost everything. You've worked your whole life, saved your money, and he took it all. I'm not going to let him get away with it. I can handle it. I just need your trust." His words hit me harder than I expected. He wasn't being reckless, he was being strategic. Every action, every step, was calculated. The boy had taken the betrayal that had shaken our family and turned it into determination. I felt a wave of pride, but it was mixed with fear. Fear for his safety, for what might happen if Derek discovered what Jack was doing. We spent the next few days coordinating quietly. Jack would share his findings with me in secret. A snippet of recorded conversation here, a suspicious invoice there. We went over the evidence together, checking it, organizing it, making sure everything was solid. I began to realize that his plan was not just clever, it was thorough, and it had the potential to bring down the man who had destroyed so much of our lives. Despite my worries, I had to admit that Jack was right. My savings were gone, Kaylee was still blind to Derek's true nature, and no one else seemed willing or able to stop him. Jack had taken it upon himself to correct a wrong that had left me powerless. His courage and intelligence were remarkable, and I found myself silently cheering for him, even as I feared for the risks he was taking. The determination in Jack's eyes reminded me of my own late wife, how she would face challenges with grit and focus, and I felt a deep surge of protective instinct mixed with admiration. He wasn't just a boy plotting revenge. He was my grandson, standing up for justice in the only way he knew how. By the end of the week, Jack had compiled enough evidence to confront Derek with the truth. He had recordings, receipts, and even written admissions that left no room for denial. Every careful step he had taken, every hour spent observing and collecting proof, was about to come together. Sitting across from him in the quiet garage that evening, I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Jack, Whatever happens, you did something incredible. You took control when no one else could. But promise me you'll be careful." He nodded, his eyes firm. "I will, Grandpa. I just want to make sure he pays for what he did. For you. For us." And in that moment, I realized that despite all the betrayal and loss, Jack's cleverness and courage had turned the tide. The boy I had raised, the grandson I had protected, was now the one protecting me, and soon the truth would finally come to light. I still remember the tension in the air the day we decided to confront them. Jack and I had spent weeks gathering evidence, every recording, receipt, and written admission carefully organized. The boy was calm, almost unnervingly confident, as if he already knew the outcome before it even happened. I tried to steady my own nerves. This wasn't just about exposing Derek. It was about confronting my daughter, the person I had loved and trusted all my life, and showing her the reality she had refused to see. We arranged to meet at Kaye and Derek's apartment. I stayed in the car a moment longer, giving Jack a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "You ready for this?" I asked quietly. Jack nodded, his eyes sharp and unwavering. "I've been ready, Grandpa. Let's just do this." The moment we walked in, Derek's usual smirk greeted us. "Well, well, if it isn't Grandpa Samuel," he said, leaning lazily against the counter. "And little Jack, what's this about?" His tone was mocking, confident, like he didn't see the danger looming. Kaye appeared behind him, a mix of surprise and annoyance on her face. "Dad? Jack? What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tight. "We're busy." I took a deep breath and set my bag on the table. "Kaye, we need to talk. It's about Derek and the money he took from me. Everything is out in the open now. Jack has something to show you." Jack stepped forward, holding his old phone like a weapon. He had all the recordings ready and a stack of receipts and documents in his other hand. "Mom," he said calmly, "listen to this. I want you to hear the truth. All of it." Then he began reading aloud. Derek's texts, once hidden and smugly confident, were now laid bare in the room. Messages boasting about stolen goods, financial schemes, and excuses to cover his tracks. Derek's lies, his manipulation, and his complete disregard for anyone but himself were exposed word for word. The smirk on his face faltered slightly, though he tried to recover, attempting to laugh it off as if it were a joke. Kaylee's initial reaction was denial, her voice shaking but defensive. "That's not real. Derek would never. He's trying to help us." But Derek couldn't contain himself. His arrogance turned into fury, his voice rising, exposing the truth for everyone in the room. "I only used you, Kaye. You were nothing to me. It was your father's money I wanted all along." His eyes were wild, his temper out of control, and in that moment, the illusions Kaye had clung to shattered. I could see her face change, the color draining from her cheeks, her lips trembling. For the first time, the daughter I had raised, the woman who had blindly defended Derek, realized the truth. Her eyes flickered between Jack, her son, and me. The weight of betrayal, the realization of her own mistakes, and the knowledge that she had been used hit her all at once. She broke down, collapsing onto the couch, covering her face with trembling hands, sobbing quietly at first, then louder, until it filled the room. Jack remained steady, his voice still calm as he continued to read Derek's messages, making sure every lie and every manipulation was heard. The boy wasn't cruel, he didn't gloat, but the truth itself was undeniable, and Kaye had no choice but to face it. Derek, realizing the walls were closing in, became frantic. He shouted, throwing his hands in the air, cursing and blaming everyone else, but it was too late. Jack had the evidence in his hands, everything recorded, documented, and ready to hand over to the authorities. There was no escape, no spin, no charm that could save him this time. Finally, in a burst of rage and humiliation, Derek stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him so hard the windows rattled. For a few long seconds, silence filled the room. The only sounds were Kaylee's soft, uncontrollable sobs and Jack's steady breathing as he set down the phone and documents. I knelt beside Kaye, unsure of what to say. My heart ached for her, for the betrayal she had endured by trusting someone so unscrupulous, and for the pain she had caused us by defending him. "Kaye," I said softly, "I know this is hard, but now you know the truth. It's time to make it right." Jack placed a hand on my shoulder and nodded toward the documents. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "it's done. Everything we need is here. The police will take care of him. He can't hurt anyone else now." I felt a swell of pride for my grandson. The boy who had been hurt by Derek's schemes, who had witnessed the destruction of our family's savings, had taken control when we needed it most. He had been clever, patient, and brave, and now the truth was finally revealed. Kaye lifted her tear-streaked face, finally seeing Jack and me with clarity. She didn't need words to understand our efforts, our love, and the sacrifices we had made. The confrontation had been painful, yes, but it was also a turning point. The lies and manipulations had been stripped away, leaving only the stark truth that Derek was gone, and justice could finally move forward. I gathered the evidence Jack had so carefully collected, making sure it was ready for the authorities. As I did, I looked at my grandson, feeling a mix of gratitude and awe. Despite all the betrayal and heartbreak, we had reclaimed some control. We had confronted the lies, exposed the truth, and in the end, proved that loyalty, courage, and persistence could overcome even the worst of deceit. Kaye, finally quiet, leaned against the wall, her sobs gradually slowing. She had seen the full extent of Derek's betrayal, and in that moment, I could see that she finally understood. We were right all along, and now, together, we could begin to rebuild what had been broken. It took a few weeks, but eventually, the consequences of Derek's actions caught up with him. The police investigated thoroughly, thanks to the evidence Jack had meticulously gathered. Receipts, recordings, and written admissions left no room for doubt. One crisp morning, I watched from the doorway as uniformed officers arrived at Kaye and Derek's apartment. Derek, who had once swaggered through life with arrogance and charm, now struggled to answer questions and justify his actions. Handcuffed and escorted out, he shot one last furious glare at Kaye before being led away. There was no bravado left, no smirk, only the cold reality that his schemes had finally collapsed. Kaye's reaction was different this time. Gone was the confident woman who had defended him blindly. Instead, she slumped on the couch, her shoulders heavy with shame. She had finally seen the full scope of what had happened, the deception, the lies, and the betrayal. The reality of her choices and the pain she had caused her father and her son pressed down on her, leaving her quiet and vulnerable. It was humbling, even heartbreaking, to witness. A few days later, she called me over. When I arrived, she didn't speak immediately. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling slightly. I could see she was struggling to find words, but the sincerity in her expression was unmistakable. "Dad," she began, voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I didn't listen to you. I know now how wrong I was to trust him, to put him above family." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I had loved her unconditionally for decades, but I knew that forgiveness didn't mean ignoring boundaries. I had to protect myself and make sure she understood the line she had crossed. "Kaye," I said quietly but firmly, "I'll always love you and I always will. But I can't let you hurt me again. You need to understand that trust isn't something I give lightly, and it has to be earned." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks, the weight of her guilt evident in every movement. "I understand, Dad. I promise I'll never let it get this far again." Even as I spoke, I felt a small sense of closure. The betrayal that had shattered my life, the theft that had almost taken everything from us, had finally been addressed. There was accountability, there was honesty, and most importantly, there was the chance to rebuild. Kaye had learned the hard way, but she had learned. Through all of this, Jack remained my constant source of hope and pride. The boy had grown so much, not just in maturity, but in courage and compassion. He had seen the destruction Derek caused, observed the way his mother had been manipulated, and yet he had stepped forward without hesitation. He had taken charge when no one else could, gathering evidence and protecting the family in a way that left me in awe. Jack's presence had reminded me that despite betrayal, love and loyalty could survive. They could thrive through the younger generation, through those willing to fight for what was right. He was not just a grandson. He was a symbol of resilience, a proof that even in the darkest times, integrity and courage could prevail. One evening, after the police had finished taking Derek's statement and Kaye had quietly left the room, Jack and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of gold and pink. There was a calmness in the air, a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. Jack leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly. "Grandpa," he said softly, "you know we don't need millions. We've got each other, and that's enough." His words struck me more deeply than I expected. He was right. Money had been taken, dreams had been broken, and yet, in the end, we still had what truly mattered: family, trust, and each other. I reached over and ruffled his hair gently. "You're right, Jack. That's exactly enough." The house, once heavy with tension and betrayal, now felt alive with warmth again. The silence that had haunted me after losing my savings had been replaced with laughter, conversation, and the quiet strength of knowing that we had endured and survived. Jack and I shared small victories together, fixing things around the house, sharing meals, talking about life. Each moment felt precious, a reminder that even after devastation, life could rebuild itself, stronger than before. Even Kaye, despite her mistakes, began to take small steps toward redemption. She didn't demand forgiveness, and she respected the boundaries I had set. Her presence was tentative at first, but I could see she was trying, and that was all I could hope for. The damage had been done, but healing had begun. As night fell, I sat with Jack, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and contentment. The road had been hard, the betrayals sharp, and the heartbreak real, but in the end we had emerged stronger. Derek's arrest brought justice, Kaye faced the truth of her choices, and Jack had proven that loyalty, courage, and love could survive even the darkest trials. I glanced at my grandson, my heart swelling with pride. He had turned a devastating situation into a lesson, a victory, and a promise that family could endure. No one could take that from us. Jack, I said quietly, you've made me proud in ways I can't even describe. He smiled, looking at me with the same determination and love that had guided him through the entire ordeal. We've got each other, Grandpa. That's all that matters. And in that moment, I knew he was right. All the money, all the plans, all the betrayals, they didn't define us. What mattered was family, love, and the bond that no one could break. Together, Jack and I had survived the storm, and together, we would face whatever came next. What do you think about how Samuel handled everything? Should he have tried harder with Kaye, or was protecting Jack the right choice? Share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear what you think. And if you love emotional, family-driven stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new one.